one of the questions I sometimes ask myself, or I encourage other people to ask themselves is, well, what could I learn from this conversation? It could be a one-on-one, could be in an event, but what could I learn from it?
Welcome to the Cultivating Leaders Podcast, where we get inside the minds of changemakers in food and agriculture to harvest ideas that help you grow as a difference maker. I'm your host and curiosity captain, Nicole Ursig. Today's guest is someone who doesn't just talk about leadership, he builds it, one authentic connection at a time. David Nothmann is a strategic growth leader with more than 25 years of experience in agriculture, ag tech, and food innovation. He's held executive roles at startups and global companies alike, helping scale new technologies, grow teams, and navigate change. But if you ask him what made the biggest difference in his career, it probably wouldn't be a product launch or a title, it would be the people. David believes relationships are the most valuable currency a leader has, and he's here to talk about how to build them with intention, depth, and impact. David, welcome to the podcast.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Did I get anything wrong in your bio?
You didn't get anything wrong. You changed it up, and I love that. There was one thing you were missing.
What am I missing?
Well, I'm the father of two very different, wonderful teenagers, and that is part of who I am and the family, and that we're going to talk a lot about relationships. I'll tell you that my boys have made me a better person. I continue to learn from them, and because of them, whatever they choose, I hope that they find a welcoming community like AFA, full of good people, great mentors. And so that's maybe the little piece you were missing that was part of how it's going to tie in today. But I'm a husband and a brother, and we're going to talk a little bit about family and how those friendships and bonds are important. But everything else, I think you're pretty spot on.
Awesome. Well, I love that. That's a great connector. You are someone I think who is building the type of community that you hope your children get to enter from a professional standpoint someday. I also guess we did not mention that you are closely tied with AFA. You've been a past board member, huge volunteer, are one of our executive ambassadors. So very much appreciate the work you do with AFA as well. I am curious, David. Agriculture is an industry that's built on trust, but talk to us about how relationships have impacted major business decisions in your career.
I think relationships provide a sense of belonging, and they provide that trust that you mentioned is so important. And they don't just happen. They're something you got to invest in. I can think of a couple examples where the easy decision or the straightforward transactional decision may have been different than one with a partner who I knew for a long time. It's like, well, I wonder why they're doing that. And usually it's an assumption I've made or a miscommunication or something down the road. And it's come back to having that conversation and realizing like, that's not the person that I that's not what I think they'd be doing. So I'm missing something. And it gives that friend, right, that relationship more benefit of the doubt, so that you don't do a trigger reaction or response. And so I've had that happen a few times in high stakes situations, and a couple of them are a little confidential, but some of them are, and I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about this, but some of them are situations where I've known a person or a company or people at a company for a long time, and both sides have invested in establishing a stronger relationship and a more solid relationship so that we could have a tough conversation. So I've seen that time and again, and it changes the dynamic of that hard conversation.
Yeah. Just to give folks more of a background of you, how did you get into agriculture, and talk about some of the roles or leadership experience that have been a part of your career?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't grow up on a farm, and I didn't study agriculture. I followed a passion around environmental issues. I was at an MBA school, and I was the guy in overalls at NYU running around New York City because I liked them. They were comfortable, but followed a passion for environment. I applied for an internship with all the major chemical companies saying, hey, I want to understand these companies can't all be that bad. And I got a role, an intern with Monsanto. I ended up working there for 13 years with a lot of different roles and responsibilities while I was at Monsanto. And you asked about other changes and responsibilities later on. I left a leadership role at Monsanto to take a leadership role at Arborgen, which is a tree seedling and biotech company. Smaller pond, bigger fish, I guess. Had more responsibilities in that case, which was product development and product management and business development and sort of the regulatory frameworks as we brought products to market. Yeah, I went on from there. I headed up, I wanted P&L accountability. I spent some time at Battelle leading 2 profit and loss centers. Ended up parting there to come out here to California. where we've been for coming up on 8 years. Came out with Valent USA, the Sumitomo Chemical North America arm. Headed up their marketing, also headed up several P&Ls for them. Really had a great experience at Valent. Learned a lot more about sustainable solutions, founding that, and ultimately took a role at a startup, a growth stage startup called Terramera. It's called something else today. They've kind of done some different things. Took a role after that at Unfold as the chief operating officer. And I'm currently, having exited that business, a sale to Bayer, a startup. That's always a good thing to be able to exit. I'm kind of looking for my next big thing. Right. So I've leaned into the board work that I do. I'm doing some consulting work, but ultimately I'm ready to take on the next big challenge and looking for leadership positions. Could be at a big company, could be at a small company. There are pros and cons to each, but that's how I got to where I am. And I've really had a blessed life and experience along the way.
That's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing. I think you don't have that kind of growth and different types of opportunities without being a builder of relationships and connections. And that's how I know you, as someone who is a great connector and bridge builder of people. Is that something that has always come naturally to you?
Well, no. My wife Jessica, my brothers would probably laugh when I told them, I kind of started out much more introverted. Today, I feel like I can go to a room and talk to anybody because they see that. That's how they see me today. I'll go and I'll talk to anybody. But that was not how I was wired, and I was definitely a little bit more shy and hung back. A lot of high school dances, that's where I was, in the back, not asking people for dance floor. So I learned it by just putting myself out there. And I don't necessarily think it was a mentor in that case. I think it just was something I realized I had to do. And then I started to like it. And then I started to realize it paid dividends. And I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about that journey, having those connections and networking. But for me, no, it did not come naturally.
So, how did you overcome that? Because I think a lot of people feel that way. Like when you say the word networking, like some people have a visceral reaction, right? Like dread. How do you overcome what makes so many people uncomfortable in those situations where you've got to walk into a room, you don't know anyone, and build connections?
Yeah, I think with everything, we grow when we fail. We grow when we are stretched in ways that we don't want to. And I think it's the reminder of, okay, I'm not necessarily going to love this, but I'm going to learn something out of it, or I'm going to meet somebody, right? And one of the questions I sometimes ask myself, or I encourage other people to ask themselves, is, well, what could I learn from this conversation? It could be a one-on-one, could be in an event, but what could I learn from it? Right. And if you're really more of the academic person and don't want to do that, go about it in an academic manner, right? So say, what could I learn? Okay, these are 3 things I learned. Write it down. Go in and have that conversation because you're going to already be more prepared than you otherwise would. Have the conversation, and then when it's done, whether it's online or whether it's at a conference, go back and look at your list. I'm guessing that of the 3 to 5 things that you wrote down, maybe one of them happened and 4 others that you didn't think of also happened. Right. And then you're like, wow, I learned some things that I didn't know or didn't think I'd know. What are some questions that you might be able to ask? Like with everything, you want to be prepared. So why are you anxious? Are you anxious because you're not prepared? You can prepare. Lots of things you can do to prepare.
Oh, I love that. I love the mindset of what can I learn from this conversation, because it also takes some of the pressure off of you, right? Of, okay, I'm going to walk in here and I'm going to see what I can learn from other people. I'm not focused on, okay, what is my elevator speech? What am I going to tell them about me? All of those things.
I do think there's value in practicing an elevator speech. I do think being succinct is important, but it doesn't have to be about you. And in fact, you're going to have a better connection with somebody if you get them talking.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have any other advice for getting people talking?
We can start with what do you do, but if you can migrate them and get them talking about their family, if you can get them talking about their hobbies, right, that's a connection. And you should be searching for overlap, things that you share, because those commonalities are going to be a genuine connection, right? And you want it to be genuine. Do you have any pets, right? I mean, you don't need to lead with that, but somewhere work that in. They'll start talking about their dog or cat or horse or whatever. And if you have a pet, they'll probably ask you in return. And there you got a connection.
So, how do you know, David, when to keep pushing forward in the conversation, or, okay, maybe they're not feeling it, maybe you're not feeling it? How do I know when to move on?
I think it depends, right? I mean, I think that if you're at a conference and there are lots of other people, there are easy ways to exit. If it's a video conference where it's a one-on-one, there's a socially acceptable way to exit. But really ask yourself, am I doing this because I'm uncomfortable? And remind yourself that your discomfort is going to help you grow. Or am I doing it because I think they want to go? They're not comfortable. And why is that? What else could I do to make them feel more comfortable? But let's assume that both parties are ready. Part of the conversation in a conference setting, you might be like, hey, I really appreciate X, Y, and Z, right? Something you learned about them. And make it genuine. Whatever you learned that was genuine, I appreciate the conversation today. And don't forget, if in this case, you may think you don't want that contact, but there's no harm in asking for the card, or today the digital card, or the LinkedIn connection, whatever it is. There's no harm in that, right? So go ahead and do that, and then say, but I'd really love to network with some other folks. I'd love to talk with somebody else. I really appreciated it, and then just move on. It's not necessarily hard when there's a group of people. When it's a one-on-one person, you might try something else. You might just say, look, I've enjoyed the time, same upfront piece of work there, but I think I've got some things that I want to reflect on and may want to come back with you. Always keep that door open if you can. Always keep that door open. And in some cases, you definitely want it. In the scenario you just built, you don't necessarily know that you want it, but you can still keep it open. Other cases, you want to come back to them. So you may want to be more specific in saying something like, well, could I call you in a week or two? Try to get them to say yes. Would it be okay if I reach back out to you about this or about, right? And most people will say yes. I don't think I've ever had somebody say, well, no, it's not okay. But that gives you the clarity that you need, maybe to reach back out to. So I think, you just say, hey, I've got to run here. Thanks for the conversation. I hope you have a great day. And then, and this is the piece that a lot of people forget, right? I think any networking, you do pre-work if you can. Sometimes you can't. You do the actual interaction, and then what's the post-work? And that post-work is almost always forgotten. Sometimes people do it or do part of it. I forget it sometimes. Like, I got more follow-ups, get back into my life and my swing of things. But even if that was an interaction where you're like, I just wanted to get out of it, step back, go for a walk, come back and be like, well, what did I learn? What was the one or two things that I learned? Send them a note. If you're not already connected on LinkedIn, send them a LinkedIn request, make a comment of just say, really appreciate the conversation today, and specifically this, right? And then you've got a LinkedIn request and a new contact, hopefully. No harm in any of that, right?
Yeah. What do you say to people who would feel like, oh, well, I don't want to bug them. I don't want to bother them?
I hear that a lot. I have a friend, a seasoned 30-year in the industry, and she says that a lot, right? I don't want to bother them. And so following up with somebody and thanking them is not a bother. If it's a reach out in the first place, you can do a couple things. You can ask for an introduction. And I do this with people I've just met, and I do this with people I've known for 30 years. I'll use the phrasing of a friend who I reconnected with. This is a high school friend who I didn't talk to for 20 years, and then we've reconnected recently. And he has a podcast. And at the end of it, he always asks, and I'm going to mix up the phrasing, but he says, who is someone that you know that I don't know that I should know? And he does that with people he's just met and people that he's known for a long time. But that's the same thing. I don't use that phrasing necessarily, but I often will ask, based on the conversation, is there somebody who springs to mind that you think would be a good person for me to meet? And if they've just met me, then I might say, well, why do you think that's a good connection? Right. And sometimes they don't have somebody, but you can follow up in an email or a text or a LinkedIn dialogue chat. That's how I network a lot, getting that next referral, getting that next referral, getting that next referral. For people who really know you, they'll have people that they think about. And it doesn't have to be, because they're in your line of work. Could be because, I know you both have dogs and you like to run. Okay, well, that's a connection. And then you don't know where it's going to lead. I heard something the other day. I won't say their names. I don't want to, but I heard from a CFO at a company. He'd come back to the Bay Area, and his wife and the CEO's wife had some connection at yoga or something. And they started talking, and they were like, oh, your husband's an ag. Oh, my husband's an ag, right? And sooner than you know it, they're working together at the same company. I've had that happen. My wife and somebody else's wife, they were den mothers together. Same conversation. So you never know where that connection's going to be. Our boys were in Cub Scouts together. Turns out that we're friends now for 20 years, essentially, right?
Yeah, that's amazing. Do you have any stories in your career where what maybe felt like a chance connection or a small interaction turned into something big down the road?
I don't know if it's a chance interaction because I ended up getting a job there, but I'll tell you a story about somebody who has continued to be a coach and mentor in my life. And we are so different. We are just very, very different people. And so I went to interview at Arborgen. I'll name him at least by first name. I went to interview at Arborgen, and I flew out there, and he picked me up at the hotel. Years later, he would say, well, David, I was watching you from that first interaction. I was watching how you interacted when you checked out. How did you treat that person? That was some really good insight. Now, this person is somebody who I go to now for all sorts of advice, right? I go to advice on my kids, I go to advice on my career, but we are very, very different people just in how we think of the world. But at the heart of it, we value relationships and we value friendships and we respect those differences that we have. I would say we've got a lot of similarities too, but at any rate, that was something that if you had asked me, would you be this person's friend? I'd be like, I don't know.
That's awesome. Okay, I do want to talk about follow-up because you hinted to this. And for anyone who is not connected with David on LinkedIn, he is very active. And I always see you in the comments of people's stuff. So I think you do a good job of follow-up from a LinkedIn standpoint. One, how did you get started on that? And two, what advice do you have for the LinkedIn follow-up?
I got started on LinkedIn early, so don't look at, I don't know how many I have, X number of connections and be like, oh, well, how do you do that? There was a lot of it was time and consistency. Like, it's the same thing about weight loss or exercise, fitness, you got to just put in some time and
Yeah, you got to do the rep.
you got to do the reps. You got to do the work. And the work in LinkedIn is, have somewhat of a profile. First thing you can do is go, and it's not just about finding a job. A lot of people think it's about finding a job. A lot of times for me, it's about seeing what is going on in the industry. So you can apply and be accepted to parts of groups. There's agriculture groups and ag tech groups and all sorts of things that you can follow and like and get information. So you can start consuming it. That's sort of the low risk, low reward, but low risk entry point, and have something on your profile about what you've done. Now, depending on who you talk to, some people say I got too much on my profile about the things that I've done, and others will say it's great because they really know some of the things that I've done in my career. I don't know. Just at one point, that was the way to do it. I don't know if it still is. But having a little bit of detail does give people something to latch onto. And if you want to sort of go the full other route, you have to start by knowing who you are, and then what is the persona you want to be out there. Right. And I wouldn't make those like drastically different. But one of the things is if you're going to post on LinkedIn, different from liking, but if you're going to post something, make sure it is part of your persona, who you are. Now, that seems like it's easy to do, and it is actually not that hard. You just need to make sure that you're not doing things for the wrong reasons. Don't go down that path of sort of saying, I think I should do this versus this is who I really am. I often say, if you're going to send an email to somebody, if I were to be like, oh, I want to send Nancy this email about something I've read, I think she's really going to like it. I may still do that, but why wouldn't I just post about it on LinkedIn? Read this article, and these were 3 things that I thought about. There's no real harm in that. And of course, the more people you have as connections, more people who are going to like it and share it and do other things. And sometimes those insights can be brief and they can be a repost of something that somebody else has done. And sometimes they can be like, I've really been thinking about this. Right? I did one on water in California, and it's a lot about water rights in California that I don't know. And I put that out front. I was like, look, I am not an expert, but based on what I know. And somebody wrote on the comments, they're like, you mischaracterized this. They were very kind about it. And I changed the post to reflect that. Based on data that they had and information that they shared with me. I think posting on something that means something to you, whether that's an email that you might forward or an article that you might forward, why are you forwarding to that person? Why not just post it on LinkedIn?
Yeah, share it with someone or share it with multiple people.
Share it with all people, all sorts of people. And then you can ask a question. I see sometimes this works better than others, so don't be discouraged if it doesn't work. You can ask a question like, share your best practice, establishing a new habit or whatever you're posting on. And sometimes people do post things and other times they don't. I've had posts that have gone, 5,000 impressions or something, and I have no idea why that one went and another one didn't. I do think there's something about tagging people, whether it's a hashtag or putting their name and their link, that will help, because if they have a lot of contacts, then, and this is where I said I could probably do a whole podcast around this. Because I like it. I think it is a good tool. That's all it is. It's a tool. But then people who do like it, I go back and I see who's liked my comments or my post who I don't know, right? If it shows all these first degree connections, people I do know, and then it'll show some second or third degree connections, and I'll look at them online and I'll be like, and remember, when you look at them online, generally they see that you've looked at them. So I'm like, well, I've already looked at them. I might as well ask for connection request.
So, what we've talked about has been a lot of like the first stage of a relationship building. How do you maintain that momentum and continue to grow and develop the relationship once it's beyond that? Okay, initially we made a connection, or now we're connected on LinkedIn, so that it doesn't just feel stale or transactional.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it's got to be genuine. You've got to have a good memory, or if you don't have a good memory, you have to have a good note-taking system. Some people, I'm a big believer in CRMs. I don't actually use it that much with my personal interactions. It's not like I'm going to say, oh, so and so has 2 kids and a dog and 3 cats, and I'm going to put that all in some system. I don't generally do that with this type of networking and relationship, but I have a decent memory. And sometimes I'll put something in my Microsoft Office contact info if I'm like, I don't know if I'm going to remember that. I'll give you some more concrete examples. A guy was interested in startups on I don't know how he got contacted me other than I probably have investor, which is probably overstated. I do investments, but they're really small with startups. So he reached out on LinkedIn, and he said, well, would you look at my pitch deck? So I did. His name was Alexander Chuck, Alika. But I don't do much in animal ag. So at the last leaders conference, there were so many animal ag students there, right? More than I'd ever seen, really. And so I had people asking, well, what do you do? And I said, well, I don't know that many people in animal ag. I'll introduce you to this guy who I just met, who's, heads up Merck's recruiting or whoever, right? And so I was doing that actively during the conference. But I also said, hey, if you're interested in the startup side, here's this guy, Lee Kachuk, and I would introduce people in animal ag just because these are two people never met each other, but they might have something in common. And when other people reach out and keep that alive, and there are a number of folks at AFA who followed this, I won't say formula, but I would say, be genuine, do your homework in advance, ask questions during it, do the follow-up on email, social media, and stay connected in that genuine level. And the people that I would sort of call out, who I know beyond the staff, Mercedes, Michael Kerr, these are people who I've known for a while. But, Topanga, who you may know, Topanga Daly, McBride previously, Topanga, she had in her memory that I got up I didn't even remember it. Right. I just did it. Right. But she was like, oh man, he got up really early and met with me because I just wanted to meet with him at some conference. And so she reminded me of that, introduced me to her fiance at the time. She does it. She reaches back out to me. I'm interested in her. I follow her when she's doing something. I just commented on a post today. That's why it's in my head. Taylor and Micah Mensing. I knew Taylor from something else. And then I knew Micah from AFA. I kind of knew them both, but I didn't know obviously they got married, but they continue to stay in touch with me. Raymond Yan, another guy who I met, I think through AFA, but I've now seen at Farm Foundation. I've seen him out here in the Bay Area. These are people who just also make the reciprocal effort. So what do? You just continue to say, oh, I think so-and-so would be interested in this. I'm going to connect them. I'm going to tag them, right? I'm going to tag them in a post. I've tagged, I think, most of the people I just mentioned. I have a passion around bringing more people from the coast to the leaders conference. I'm passionate about it because I think what you all do is so great, and it started in the heartland. So it's sort of got a bigger following in the heartland. It's harder to travel from the coast. So there's a guy who's been a few times. I think he's now graduated. I know he's graduated, Emilio. And I've seen him out here many times in different situations. And I've tagged him in posts around robotics because now he's working, I think, with Verdant Robotics. And calling people. I get texts from Raymond. So, and they're not invasive. They're just like, hey, I was thinking about this, and then I'll, text him back or get on a call with him.
Mm-hmm. I love that. It actually kind of goes perfectly into what I want to talk about next, which is how do you build relationships across generations in the workspace? I know this is something that gets talked about a lot, but there's a lot of common age gaps in agriculture or in many of the workplaces that we're in. And you're talking about like you have had a very fruitful career, but you also build relationships with people who are just entering their career too.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a certain amount of humility. I can't speak and won't try to speak for the younger generation. Ask that same question of Topanga, Raymond, or somebody else who's younger than I am. But for me, I would say there's got to be a humility for somebody who's more established in their career to say, I can learn something from this person and they've got something to share. And what is that? And there's a lot. I serve on a couple personal board of advisors, and I always encourage them to bring somebody onto the board who's younger than them for a different perspective, right? So a lot of people think, oh, I can only get advice from people who are more established. And the answer is absolutely not. Like, have somebody on your personal board of advisors who's maybe younger, less experienced, but still accomplished in their own right? There's got to be a reason you have them there.
Hey, David, can we pause for a second? I know you and I are both very familiar with a personal board of advisors, but for any of our listeners who don't know what we're talking about when we say that, can you explain what that is and why it would be important to have one?
I will succinctly try to do that and then also guide folks to my LinkedIn page or AFA's page, where they asked me to do a 1-hour session on personal board of advisors. So if you want more in depth, there are resources out there. And honestly, this isn't a term that I've coined. It's something that's been out there for several decades, which is essentially, companies have board of directors that help them guide the company, right? Financially, but also growth and all sorts of other areas. And like that, how do you establish, somewhere between 3 to 5 people that serve on your personal board of advisors that are going to keep you accountable and push you to your best self? So there has to be somebody you trust, and you meet with them regularly. You meet with them one-on-one. I think the best personal board of advisors also have some meetings where all the board members are present, because you can learn from other board members. That's a little harder to coordinate, but I've seen it work and be beneficial both for the board members and for the person who's got that board of advisors. So that's what a personal board of advisors is. Help you guide you in your career.
Yes, absolutely. Do you have someone younger than you on your current personal board of advisors?
I do not, and that's a fair question. I actually need to revise my personal board of advisors as my career has changed. I actually have a list right here. Right? I'm not going to show you who's on it, but I've got several people, and I'm trying to think through who I want on there. And there is a comment of some people who are younger. So I don't currently, but I do have a list going as I'm thinking through my next stage and who I feel like needs to be on that.
Oh, I love that. I love that you're thinking about it, that you've got a list and a sticky note next to your desk. I think such an example, right, of practice what you're preaching. So cool. You have led teams, David, through growth and change. And we've talked a lot in this conversation around like networking and some of that initial kind of relationship building. But let's talk about building trust and what advice or recommendations you may have to building trust when you're the new person in the room.
It's funny when you think about long-term relationships and trust, it takes time. We would do these 3-year stability studies when I was at Battelle on chemistries, and people were like, well, can we do them faster? No, they're 3-year stability studies. They take 3 years, right? And so trust also takes time. And I think coming back to what can you do to establish that trust is you spend time in the moment with that person. That sounds so easy, but in the moment, put down your phone, put down any other distractions, make sure that you are truly with them and experiencing something with them. And if you can have a meal or a run, go and do something special with them. When I was at Valent, and we did this when I was at Monsanto as well, but Valent's a little more recent. We had a very strong relationship, of which some of the P&Ls that I covered, some of those were very, very interconnected with New Farm. And so I established a steering committee, and everybody on that steering committee, people more senior than me, and in some cases, people within the group. But the steering committee was committed to arriving a day early so that we could have a meal together before we got off. We'd have an agenda that we would go through, and people came and had their presentations or updates. But we were very committed to that social time before. Right? Have a meal, do something. I'm not much of a golfer, but you can golf, fish, do something else. But spending that personal time and connecting. I'm a believer in doing that before any type of big meeting anyway, because it sort of takes the pressure off of that initial interaction. But in this case, high stakes, millions, tens of millions of dollars associated with the relationship. And people showed up. People genuinely showed up. They started to get to know each other. We talked about this early in the podcast, but when there was an issue, and there was, and I won't go into tons of detail, but there was an issue, you could pick up the phone and have that conversation with somebody, be like, hey, this doesn't feel great. Like in the marketplace, this seems to be what's going on. And you could listen differently. So I think anytime you can share that experience, Sometimes you can follow them on Facebook, and some people use Facebook for work. I just use it for personal. Brendan Deck is now retired or on the board. I forget, but he was the person I interacted with quite a bit. He was more senior than me, but I follow him and his family celebrate their events on Facebook that may not be on LinkedIn. And so I think that when you are able to have that genuine connection and they're like, yeah, I'm okay being a Facebook friend, right? Different from it's a personal friendship that's beyond. I think those are ways that you kind of know, like I'm not going to be everybody's Facebook friend. For some people, and some people out there, Facebook is so old. My kids are like turning over, so I got to get my TikTok account going or something.
That's okay. Different platforms for different folks. I love that you said, though, how trust takes time. And I think sometimes there is a pressure to provide the results or perform. And sometimes this work takes relational work as well. And relational work just takes the time and the investment. And you got to work on that part first before you can get through to what maybe we would consider work. Do you have any thoughts on how you balance that, like results driven leadership? You've got to get stuff done, but also relational work.
When we're there at the end, sitting, it's the relationships that matter, right? And it's the relationships, whether they're with family and friends or close colleagues from work, who are essentially friends at that point. That's who you're going to remember, and you're not going to say, "Oh, well, I made the quarter, right?" Or I didn't make the quarter. And I think you've got to. I think you just have to remember the long game. That's what's important. Yes, you still have to perform, but are the results realistic? Right? Are they something you signed up for? I want to talk a little bit about results for a second, right? I had somebody who reported to me, it's like, why can't we do things the way we've always done them? Well, we wanted to grow, and doing them the way we've always done them would keep us at a flat level with increased costs, so our margins would go down. And so I'm a believer that never do things go entirely as planned, right? You have a budget and it's wrong the minute after you establish it. And so if you're like, okay, well, we're not going to make that sale, what are some other things that you could do, right, to help fill that gap? Come with some ideas. Come with some ideas. And sometimes those take money and investment. And if it's going to make money, then you're going to invest some money, even if it's tight, if you believe that it's really going to turn out positively. And so I think the results piece is important, but more important at the end of the day are relationships.
Yeah. David, do you think you can be friends with people you work with?
I do, and I have been. I just went to a baby shower for somebody who I worked with at Unfold, right? And I would have gone even if we were still at Unfold together, right? That was a company that got bought, but absolutely. And obviously, they're a little younger than I am. It was so good to see them and see them in that element. And I absolutely think it's possible to be friends with people that you work with. I think that you need to be mindful of boundaries. You need to be able to talk about boundaries, especially if there's a leveling situation. But no, I absolutely think you can have friendships in the workplace. I hope to. You will spend so much time there.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I'm going to flip this around. We've talked a lot about building bridges and building connections. Is there ever a right time where you should burn a bridge?
Oh, wow. I don't know as if I've consciously burned any bridges in my career. I try to coach folks not to do that. Right? I'm trying to think of a situation where you just say it's gone too far, right? Or there's no reconciliation possible. It's hard for me to imagine that in a work setting. We may have very different political views. We may have very different. I can think of some hypotheticals, right? Now, now that you posed it to me, but so if somebody's stolen from the company, that's a dismissal situation. Who knows what led them to that? I'm not going to make an excuse for it, but I don't know if I'd be very mindful and careful about it going forward, that relationship, but I don't know if I'd totally burn the bridge. You just don't know what caused them to do that. But that's something, yeah, I don't know. There are hypotheticals. It's not happened in my career where I've completely burned a bridge. There are people, there are fewer than I can count on my one hand, that I would prefer. I'm not a basketball player, but I prefer to play a person down than have them on my team. I won't burn the bridge because, you never know who they know, and maybe there's a reason why they were that way, but I would prefer not to work with them. But it's a short list.
That's not a bad place to be. Okay, David, we are running low on time, so I would like to move to some rapid fire questions. What's the best leadership advice you've ever received?
Out of college, I was working at a music recording and production studio, and the owner, my boss Akil, was great at investing time and teaching people things and then delegating that responsibility to them. So he would be like, delegate, 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 never do what someone else on the team can do. And I think that this in part is where I get my ABC, like always be curious mindset, and my interest in developing people, because it's not it's helps them, but it also helps you. And so I think delegate, delegate, delegate is something I learned early. Worth mentioning is maybe something I read recently, which is don't false delegate, right? Don't tell them they can do it, and then you're still going to make the decision. So clarity about who's making the decision is critical when you delegate.
Good advice. What is one leadership habit or routine that you swear by?
We kind of touched on it earlier, but I'll be a little bit more clear, and that's development plans. I'm a big believer that everybody should have a 3 to 5 year development plan, identify the role that they want to have and work backwards from that, thinking through what are the skills and experiences that I need to be the best candidate for that role, and really determine, is it achievable? Because it's not always like I want to be CEO in 3 years and you're a sales associate. That may not be the right and most appropriate. But I do think a development plan is habit, and it's a good practice. It's one that I practice.
Awesome. What is a book, podcast, or resource that every leader should check out?
I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. The Dare to Lead, in terms of applying courage and vulnerability is always a good one. I like the Rising Strong, which is how do you learn from failure? And she's done some great work on shame. I think a lot of her work, it makes me think differently.
Yes. Big Brene Brown fan here as well. What do you look for when someone asks you to be a mentor or connection?
Are they willing to put in the work? Right. And I also look at my own workload, right? If I say no, it may have nothing to do with you. It may have to do with my ability to be the best mentor or coach to you. And I do take people on, and I revisit. I've been at it 3 years or however many years. Is it time to take a less involved role? But I look at myself and my deck of everything I've got and I'm juggling, and then I want to make sure that they're really invested. Are they going to put in the work?
What is a leadership myth that needs to be busted?
Leaders need to have all the answers. Not everybody believes that, but some people do. And I think that the best leaders really embrace collaboration, admit they don't know everything, show that vulnerability, get the teams coming up with better solutions. So that's a myth in my mind that some leaders still hold, and I don't.
I love it. Okay, last one. What is the best networking move you've ever made?
I still do it. And this was early on. Probably one of my first roles at Monsanto. One of my bosses at the time said, "Look, the assistants are the gatekeepers. Treat them with respect. Treat them well. They're the ones who know the calendars and can get you access." And so, if you really, again, not just because you want that access, try to connect with them on a personal level. I've really benefited by having some outstanding assistants myself. I know how hard they work. And I would just say, from a networking perspective, they know a lot of people. And when you're at a level that you have an assistant, you have access. So that's treat them well and treat them genuinely.
I love that. Okay, and we love hot takes at AFA. So what is a bold or unconventional opinion that you have about agriculture, leadership, or building relationships?
I'd go back to something we touched on, but it's this idea of reverse mentorship. So people all think that they can only learn from others who have more experience, and I really think that if I think back on where we started this podcast, and I mentioned that I keep learning from my 2 sons. Just as an example, we've got so much to learn from, and if we're really open about it, I think just this idea of reverse mentorship, be open to be like, okay, maybe I don't know all the answers, or I can learn something here.
Mm-hmm. I think that's your takeaway. Like, what can I learn? That feels like the number one nugget from you today, David. Well, thank you so much for your time and your knowledge and your wisdom. If people want to learn more about you or connect with you, where's the best place that they can find you, David?
LinkedIn is a great place to find me. Just search for David Nothmann, Nothmann. There aren't too many Nothmans out there, and I think I'm the only one with a burly beard. So
Well, thank you so much, David. Appreciate all you had to share and for reminding us that relationships aren't just a leadership tool, that they're the foundation of everything. So we appreciate you, and thanks for being on the Cultivating Leaders Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Cultivating Leaders Podcast, brought to you by Agriculture Future of America. If you've been here before, you know we value feedback as a gift. Please leave us a review and let us know how we're doing.